I used to think the safest place in the world was a room full of people who already knew your name. Not the version of your name you put on forms, not the version strangers use when they're being polite, the version that's spoken like a fact, the one that says, "You belong here." That's what it felt like growing up around money so old it didn't sparkle. It didn't show off. It didn't need to. It lived in things that didn't move much: land, trusts, quiet board seats, private art, handwritten letters that never left the family office. Our wealth didn't shout. It nodded. And because it was so quiet, I assumed it was all so stable. I assumed that meant I was safe. I was wrong in a way that took years to understand. It began as a courtesy, a kindness, the kind of thing you accept without checking the price tag, because why would there be a price tag? I was 27 when my father started lightening my load. That was his phrase. He said it at breakfast one morning like he was talking about rearranging furniture. "You've got enough on," he said. "Let us carry the administrative parts for you." Let us. Not me, not I. He meant the family, the machine, the invisible hands that kept everything running, lawyers, accountants, advisors, assistants who didn't feel like assistants because they were older than me and spoke with the steady authority of people who never had to ask permission. I was building my own thing then, or trying to. A small fund with a friend from university. Nothing dramatic, nothing reckless, just something that belonged to me. I told myself I'd be careful. I told myself I wouldn't lean too hard on the family network, but the family network leaned on me first. They sent a woman named Nadia to help. She wasn't introduced like staff. She was introduced like a solution. Nadia was in her late 40s, always in neutral colors, always with a folder under her arm. She had the calm competence of someone who could save your life without raising her voice. At our first meeting, she sat across from me at the long library table in my parents' house and asked me questions that made me feel seen, not the obvious ones, not, "What are your goals? And where do you see yourself?" She asked things like, "When you picture the next 5 years, what scares you? What would you hate to lose? Who do you trust with bad news?" She took notes as if my answers mattered. I remember feeling relieved. I remember thinking, finally, someone who understands that the pressure isn't the work, it's the expectation. When she said she would coordinate with our legal counsel so I didn't have to keep looping people in, I said yes without hesitation. That's what you do when someone offers to make your life easier. You say yes. I didn't realize I'd just handed her the keys. The first sign something was off wasn't a dramatic confrontation. It was a missing email. I had arranged a meeting with a boutique investment bank that I wanted to partner with, small enough to be nimble, smart enough to be dangerous. We'd met once. They were interested. They asked for my term sheet and a few supporting documents. I sent everything to Nadia because that's what she was there for. She said she'd clean it up and send it through properly. 2 weeks passed. No reply. I told myself they were busy. I told myself it was normal. Then I ran into one of their directors at an event. He shook my hand, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, almost apologetically, "We assumed you'd changed your mind." I laughed like it was nothing. "I didn't," I said. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. The pause was small, but it mattered. "We received a note from your office," he said, "saying you wouldn't be proceeding." My stomach didn't drop. It tightened, like my body was trying to hold itself together. "That's not possible," I said. He gave me a look that was half sympathy, half discomfort. The look people give when they think they're witnessing a private humiliation in public. "It came from the address we used last time," he said. "Formal, polite, very final." I excused myself and walked to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and opened my phone with shaking hands. My sent items didn't show anything. Of course they didn't. I hadn't sent it. But Nadia had access to the office address. She had access to everything. I called her. She answered on the second ring, calm as always. "Yes," she said. "Did you email Grayson and Holt?" I asked. I tried to keep it casual. I tried to sound like this was a simple misunderstanding. A beat, then, yes. Why? I asked. I advised against it, she said, like she was reminding me of something I'd forgotten. I didn't agree to pull out, I said. You didn't disagree, she said. That was my first real moment of anger, hot and sharp. That's not how this works, I said. On the other end, she didn't flinch. It is in this family, she replied gently. You said you wanted less administrative burden. This is what that looks like. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, you don't get to decide for me. But I was still living inside the old assumption that people around me were working for my benefit. So I did the stupid thing. I argued like it was a misunderstanding. I explained. I clarified. I insisted. Nadia listened. She apologized. She said it wouldn't happen again. And because she sounded sincere, I let it go. That was my second mistake. The first mistake was giving her access. The second mistake was assuming sincerity meant loyalty. After that, the interference became subtler. The emails weren't missing. They were delayed. The meetings weren't canceled. They were rescheduled until the opportunity expired. I didn't notice at first because the changes were always plausible. A signature needed to be witnessed. A compliance review took longer than expected. Someone misunderstood timing. It was like trying to prove you were being quietly pushed out of your own life by a hand that never left fingerprints. When I told my father, he frowned like I'd complained about the weather. Nadia is good at what she does, he said. She made decisions without me, I said. He sipped his coffee. Decisions are always made, he said. You can either be exhausted by them or carried by them. That sentence would have sounded wise to someone who'd never been on the wrong side of it. I left that conversation thinking, I need clearer boundaries. I didn't yet think, they're doing this on purpose. It was my mother who gave me the first real clue, and she didn't even realize she was doing it. We were in the car together one afternoon, heading to an opening at a gallery that displayed art my parents pretended not to care about. She was flipping through her phone, smiling at something when she said, "Oh, your grandfather would have loved you if he'd gotten his way." I laughed because I thought it was a joke. "What does that mean?" I asked. She glanced at me. "He wanted you trained early," she said, "placed properly, not this wandering around with your own little projects." The word placed landed like a stone. "Placed where?" I asked. She waved a hand like it was obvious. "On the board, darling, in the family office, in the trust committee, where you belong." My mouth went dry. "I didn't know that was even an option," I said. My mother smiled faintly. "It's always been the plan," she said. "The plan, not a plan. The plan." I stared out the window and watched the city slide past, as if I could find the truth in the reflection. I didn't speak for the rest of the drive. That night, I started paying attention differently. Not emotionally, not dramatically, quietly. I began to treat my life like a room where I'd heard a faint noise behind the walls, something moving. The first thing I did was audit access, not in an aggressive way, not in a storm into the family office and demand passwords kind of way. I did it the way the family did everything, politely, efficiently, without showing teeth. I asked Nadia for a list of all accounts and permissions for my own records. She provided it within an hour. That should have reassured me. It didn't, because she provided it too easily. If she'd been hiding something, she'd panic. She'd stall. She'd ask why. Instead, she sent me a clean document with neat categories and a reassuring cover note. It was like she wanted me to see the list, which meant the danger wasn't in what she showed, it was in what she didn't. I started creating my own shadow system, a new email address, not connected to the family domain, a new phone number, not on the family plan, a laptop that never touched the family network, a separate bank relationship with a private banker outside the family's usual institutions. I felt ridiculous at first, like I was playing spy in my own life. But then something happened that made it feel less like paranoia and more like sanity. I tried to open an account at a brokerage for my fund. Simple. Standard. The representative called me back, voice low. "There's an issue," he said. "What issue?" I asked. He hesitated. Again, that little pause people do when they're about to tell you something that will change how you see your world. "There's a note on your profile," he said. Internal. Advising enhanced scrutiny due to family governance restrictions. My hand tightened around the phone. "What restrictions?" I asked. "Something about limitations on independent investment activities," he said. "Linked to a trust. It's flagged like a compliance concern." I felt a strange calm wash over me. Not relief, not acceptance, clarity. Because I knew what that meant. They'd marked me. Not publicly, not in a way I could sue over. They'd quietly made me radioactive. I ended the call and sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I did something that would have shocked the younger version of me. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't march into the family office. I didn't demand explanations, because confrontation would have done exactly what they wanted. Made me emotional, made me look unstable, made me a problem they could justify controlling. Instead, I began to act the way they acted. I became calm. I became polite. I became patient. And I started collecting proof. The family office had always been physically open to me, in theory. It was in the same building as my father's primary workspace, 3 floors above a private gym that only family members used, but I'd never spent time there alone. It felt like walking into a room where the air had rules. Now I started dropping by casually at odd hours. I smiled at the staff. I asked harmless questions. I learned where things were. I learned which doors required key cards. I learned which file cabinets were locked. I learned who stayed late. I learned that Nadia did. One evening, I arrived at the office at 7:45 p.m., late enough that the day staff were gone, early enough that Nadia would still be there, finishing something. She looked up when I entered, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked slightly surprised. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said, smiling. "I was in the area. Thought I'd stop by. I realized I've never actually seen where you work." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Of course," she said. "Sit. I was just finalizing some correspondence." I sat, crossed my legs, and looked around as if I were casually curious. "Do you keep everything here?" I asked. "Most," she said. "Some things are archived off-site." "Like what?" I asked. She smiled, almost indulgent. "The truly old material," she said. "Original trust documents, historical agreements, things no one needs day to day." "Do I have access to those?" I asked lightly. She held my gaze. "You have access to what you need," she said. There it was again. Not no, not yes. A sentence that sounded reasonable and meant nothing. I nodded as if I agreed. Then I changed the subject. I asked her about a charity project my mother was involved with. I let her talk. I watched the way she spoke. Measured, controlled, never giving away more than necessary. As I stood to leave, I noticed a folder on the corner of her desk, a manila folder with a strip of colored tape along the spine. The family office used color coding, different tapes for different trust structures. That tape color meant something very specific. It meant restricted family directives. I'd seen it before, briefly, in my father's study, on a file he'd closed quickly when I entered. I smiled. "Busy night," I said. "It is," she replied. As I walked out, I didn't look back, but inside, something shifted. They weren't just blocking me. They were directing me. They weren't just managing my schedule. They were managing my legal reality. The next day, I scheduled lunch with my father, not at home, not in his office, in public, at a restaurant where the staff knew him and where my family liked to pretend they were normal. He arrived 5 minutes late, as always. He kissed my cheek, sat, and asked about my week like he hadn't been quietly dismantling my autonomy. I waited until the menus were gone. Then I asked, softly, "Am I under restrictions from the trust?" His face didn't change much, but his eyes narrowed a fraction. "Who told you that?" he asked. "No one," I said. "I found out." He didn't deny it. That was the first real crack. "It's complicated," he said. "It's simple," I said. "Either I am or I'm not." He sighed as if I were being difficult. "There are provisions," he said, "designed for protection." "Protection from what?" I asked. He leaned forward slightly, voice low. "From people who would use you," he said. "From reckless decisions, from outside influence." The irony almost made me laugh. "I'm outside influence now?" I asked. He shook his head, like I was twisting his words. "You've been distracted," he said. "You've been trying to build something unnecessarily independent. It makes you vulnerable." There it was again. Vulnerable. In their language, vulnerable meant not controlled. I nodded slowly, like I understood. "Who put the provisions in place?" I asked. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at me. "Your grandfather," he said, "years ago, as a contingency." My grandfather had been dead for 12 years. A contingency. For what? For me growing a spine? I felt calm, not because I was okay, because anger would have been a gift to them. "So I'm basically on a leash," I said. He gave me a tired look. "You're protected," he repeated. I smiled faintly. "Sure," I said. And then I did something that surprised him. I changed topics. I asked about his health, about the board, about the upcoming holiday house maintenance. I played the part he expected, because if I wanted to cut the leash, I needed them to keep believing I didn't know it existed. After that lunch, I began a second project in parallel to my fund, a project no one in my family knew about. I started looking for the original trust documents, not the summaries the family office provided, not the sanitized explanations, the originals. In families like mine, power isn't in opinions, it's in paperwork. I hired a lawyer, not one from the family network, not one who would be grateful for future referrals. A woman named Elise, who had built her career taking apart messy private estates and finding the truth inside them. When I first met her, she didn't try to charm me. She didn't try to impress me. She listened, then asked one question. "What do they think you're too soft to do?" That question made my skin prickle. "I don't know," I admitted. Elise nodded once. "Then that's probably the door," she said. I told her everything. The missing email, the compliance flag, the restrictions, Nadia's calm interference. Elise didn't look surprised. She looked focused. "This isn't personal," she said. "Not in the emotional sense. It's structural. You're being managed as an asset." I swallowed. "Can I get out of it?" I asked. Elise's eyes held mine. "Paper can trap you," she said. "Paper can also free you." I wanted to believe her. She began by pulling public records, corporate filings, trust-related property titles, board appointments, anything that left a trace. Then quietly, she requested archived documents through channels that didn't ring the family office alarm bells. It took time, weeks. While she worked, I kept playing my role. I attended the family dinners. I smiled. I let Nadia run my schedule. I even thanked her once for making everything easier just to see if she flinched. She didn't. She smiled like someone watching a child walk toward a locked gate, confident the gate would hold. In the middle of this, my friend from university, the one I'd planned to build the fund with, called me in a panic. "Something's wrong," he said. "What?" I asked. "Our seed investors just pulled out," he said. "All of them, in one day. Same wording, same reason." My throat tightened. "What reason?" I asked. He hesitated. "They said there were concerns about reputational risk," he said. "They said they couldn't be aligned with the project anymore." Reputational risk. My family's favorite silent weapon. They didn't have to sue you. They didn't have to threaten you. They just had to make you undesirable. I felt the edges of something darker now. This wasn't just about my independence. They were willing to burn other people to keep me in place. I hung up and sat very still. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do yet. I tested them. I created a fake opportunity, a baited hook. I told Nadia, casually, that I'd been approached by a private equity group overseas. I said they wanted me to join as a partner. I acted excited, slightly nervous, like I was craving approval. Nadia's eyes sharpened. "That's a big move," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm considering it." She nodded slowly. "Send me their details," she said. "I'll conduct due diligence." I smiled. "Of course," I said. I sent her a clean, professional-looking packet. It was all fabricated. The company name, the people, the emails, all controlled by Elise. Within 48 hours, Elise called me. "They moved," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "They reached out to the company through channels you didn't provide," she said. "They contacted your fake firm's home office using an international compliance network." My stomach tightened again. So they had reach, not just local, not just social, institutional. Elise's voice stayed calm. "And," she added, "someone filed an internal note against you again. It's the same language." "Who?" I asked. Elise paused. "Not Nadia," she said, "or at least not directly. It's coming from a higher-level account." My mind ran through names. My father, my mother, the senior family counsel who'd known me since I was 12. Then Elise said something that made my blood go cold. "It's coming from an account tied to the trust protector," she said. "The trust protector. In wealthy families, that role is designed as a safeguard, someone with power to intervene if trustees misbehave. In theory, it's protection. In practice, it's control wearing a pleasant mask." "Who is the trust protector?" I asked. Elise exhaled softly. "You need the original documents," she said. "We're close." 2 days later, she arrived at my apartment with a thick file and a look that made me feel like the air had changed. She set the file down on my table and opened it carefully, as if it was something that could bite. "This," she said, "is what they never wanted you to read." Inside were copies of the original trust deed, amendments and side letters. I read slowly, not because it was hard to understand, but because each page rewired my reality. There it was, in cold legal language. A clause that allowed limitations on distributions and independent financial activity if the beneficiary was deemed at risk of undue influence. Undue influence. A vague phrase that could mean anything if the right person decided it did. Then I found the part that made my hands shake. A side letter signed by my grandfather appointing a trust protector. Not my father, not a lawyer, not a neutral fiduciary. My uncle, my father's older brother. A man who smiled at family events and asked me about my hobbies like he didn't care, like he was harmless. A man who'd always told me with a chuckle that I was too smart for my own good. I stared at his name on the page. "He's been running this?" I whispered. Elise didn't soften it. "He can trigger restrictions," she said. "He can replace trustees. He can limit distributions. He can label you at risk." I felt my throat tighten. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer in my bones. Elise tapped another page. "Because of the successor clause," she said. I followed her finger. If the primary beneficiary, me, was deemed unfit or compromised, authority could shift to a secondary structure, a structure controlled by the protector's preferred trustees, trustees appointed by my uncle. In other words, if they could label me unstable, influenced, reckless, anything, they could reroute the river of money away from me and into a channel they controlled. It wasn't just about keeping me compliant, it was about moving the future. And suddenly, the missing emails and blocked deals weren't just sabotage, they were evidence building. They were creating a paper trail of me as unreliable. I sat back, breathing shallowly. "So they're making me look like a risk," I said. Elise nodded. And if you push back emotionally, she said, they get to document that too. I stared at the file. The family's betrayal wasn't loud. It was procedural. It was polite. It was designed to look like protection. I took a slow breath. Okay, I said. Elise watched me. Okay, she repeated. I looked up at her. What can we do? I asked. Elise leaned in slightly. We can do what they do, she said. We can use paper. Over the next month, my life split into two worlds. In one world, I was the obedient daughter. I attended dinners. I laughed at my uncle's jokes. I let Nadia manage my schedule. I acted grateful. In the other world, Elise and I built a map. We identified every pressure point, the trustees, the protector, the lawyers, the accountants, the banks. We tracked every interference, every delayed transaction, every denied approval. Elise taught me something crucial. You don't win against a machine by punching it. You win by removing the parts it depends on. First, we needed leverage, not emotional leverage, not blackmail in the cheap sense, leverage in the only currency my family respected, credible risk. We began investigating my uncle, not gossip, not rumors, facts. And in a family like mine, facts don't stay buried forever. They just get stored in the right cabinet. Elise filed requests, dug through old corporate structures, followed money paths that were intentionally dull on the surface. At first, we found nothing, just clean entities and respectable signatures. Then, a small detail appeared in a filing, an offshore vehicle linked to a charity my uncle chaired. It wasn't illegal by itself, but it was odd. The charity had never reported overseas activity. Elise frowned at the document and said softly, "That's interesting. That's the kind of sentence that means someone just stepped on a loose floorboard." We kept pulling. We found a consulting agreement between the charity and a private company. The private company billed for strategic services. The private company was owned by a trust. The trust was administered by a firm in another jurisdiction. And the firm, tucked into the signature lines, had one familiar name, Nadia. Not as staff, not as assistant, as director. I stared at the page for a long time. Nadia works for him, I said. Elise nodded. And she works for the family, she said, which means she works for whoever is winning. That was the moment I understood her calm. She wasn't loyal. She was aligned. She aligned with power. And power, in this case, might not be my father. I felt a strange, hollow sensation in my chest, like grief, but colder. My uncle wasn't some distant influence. He'd been inside my life the whole time, smiling, watching, waiting. And Nadia, my so-called help, was his instrument. The more we looked, the uglier it got. The consulting agreement's numbers were high, not outrageous, just high enough to blend in as normal for wealthy people who throw money at things. But when Elise matched those payments to another set of documents, property purchases, art acquisitions, personal expenses, patterns emerged. Money was moving from the charity into entities that benefited my uncle, not in a direct, here's a payment to me way, in a layered, legally defensible way, a way that could be explained, unless someone understood the structure, unless someone had the map. Elise looked at me one evening, eyes steady. "This is fraud," she said. I didn't even feel shocked. I felt confirmed. "He's stealing," I said quietly. Elise nodded. "And if you expose it," she said, "he loses everything. Reputation, board seats, access. He becomes radioactive." I swallowed. "And if I try?" I asked. "He'll crush me first." Elise's mouth tightened. "He'll try," she said, "which is why we don't move loudly. We move in a way he can't stop." That's when she introduced the idea that changed everything. "You can't fight him through the trust," she said. "He controls the trust protector role. He controls the trustees. He controls the narrative." "So what can I do?" I asked. Elise tapped the file again. "You can step outside the trust," she said. I stared at her. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means," she said, You stop being the beneficiary they manage, and you become the claimant they fear. I didn't understand yet, so she explained it the way she explained everything, clean and sharp. If my uncle had abused his protector role and interfered for personal gain, it could be challenged, not as a family argument, as a breach of fiduciary duty, as an abuse of trust power. But to do that, we needed more than suspicion. We needed evidence of his intent. We needed proof he was using protection language to mask control. And for that, we needed him to make a mistake. So we set another trap. This one wasn't a fake job offer. This one was personal. At the next family dinner, I mentioned lightly that I was considering marrying my partner. I said it casually, like it was a thought. The room didn't react dramatically. My family never did dramatic, but I saw it. My father's jaw tightened slightly. My mother's smile flickered. My uncle's eyes sharpened. Nadia, seated at the far end near the staff entrance as always, looked down at her lap as if she'd just received a message. I kept talking. I mentioned offhandedly that we were thinking of moving overseas for a year. A pause. My uncle chuckled. "Bold," he said. "You always did like to wander." I smiled. "Maybe," I said. And then, as if it was nothing, I added, "I'd like my partner involved in my fund, just advisory, but I trust him." That word, trust, landed like a match near dry grass. I watched my uncle's face closely. He smiled, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. That night, Elise received an email from the trustees. It was polite, concerned, framed as care. It said they had received information that I might be under undue influence. It asked for a review meeting. Elise showed me the email. I felt a calm certainty settle in me. "He moved fast," I said. Elise nodded. "And now," she said, "we have evidence that undue influence is triggered by you making normal adult choices." We attended the review meeting, not at the family office, at a neutral conference space Elise arranged. The trustees arrived with Nadia beside them, which told me everything I needed to know about who was directing this. They asked gentle questions. They used soft language. "How are you feeling lately? Have you been under stress? Do you feel supported?" It was a performance designed to make any resistance look like instability. I answered calmly. I smiled. I sounded reasonable. Then Elise spoke. She was polite too, but her politeness had edges. "We're happy to discuss," she said, "but before we begin, we'd like to understand the basis for this review. Specifically, what evidence was presented to trigger undue influence language." The trustees exchanged a glance. One of them cleared his throat. "It's confidential," he said. Elise nodded. "I understand," she said. "Then please provide it under privilege, in writing." They hesitated. Elise didn't press. She didn't argue. She simply waited. Silence is powerful when you can afford it. Finally, one trustee said, "It came from the protector." Elise nodded as if that answered everything. "Thank you," she said. "Then we will be requesting disclosure of the protector's communications, in full." The room went very still. Nadia's face didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly on her folder. I watched her, calmly, quietly. The trustees tried to steer the conversation back to me, my well-being, my decisions, my vulnerability. Elise kept bringing it back to paper. Basis, evidence, process. They ended the meeting with a promise to review internally. When we walked out, Elise said softly, "They didn't expect you to show up with someone like me." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to pleasure, not happiness, something darker, cleaner, momentum. 2 days later, my uncle called me. He didn't call often. When he did, it was usually to offer a casual invitation or a joke that reminded me he was family. This time, his voice was smooth. "Dinner," he said. "Just you and me. I miss talking to you." I smiled into the phone. "Sure," I said. We met at a private club he loved, the kind with dark wood and discreet staff who never looked too closely. He greeted me like nothing was wrong, kissed my cheek, asked about my health. Then he leaned back and said conversationally, "You've been stirring things." I held his gaze. "I've been living," I said. He smiled. "It's dangerous," he said, as if he were warning me about a bad neighborhood. "Is it?" I asked. His eyes narrowed slightly. "You don't understand how fragile your position is," he said. I let the silence stretch. Then I asked, gently, "Why do you care?" He chuckled. "Because I love you," he said. It sounded like a line he'd used before. And then he said the sentence that, in hindsight, was the mistake Elise needed. "You can't afford to attach yourself to someone who wants what you have," he said. I tilted my head. "And what do I have?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Legacy," he said. "Access. A future." I nodded slowly. "You mean the trust?" I said. His smile held. "I mean everything," he said. I kept my voice soft. "Are you saying my partner is undue influence?" I asked. He sighed like he was tired of my innocence. "I'm saying," he said, "that people like us have to be careful. The world is full of people who would take what they didn't earn." His tone was paternal, protective, but his eyes were cold. I leaned forward slightly. "And you're protecting me," I said. He nodded. "Of course," he said. I smiled. "From who?" I asked. He paused, and for the first time, his composure wavered just enough to show impatience. "From yourself," he said. There it was. The truth slipped out like irritation. Not from outsiders, from me, from my choices, from my ability to disrupt what they'd planned. I sat back, calm. He continued, voice smooth again. "You're smart," he said, "but you're not trained. You don't understand how power works. You think you can move freely, you can't." I let him talk. I let him explain control like it was kindness, because Elise was recording the call. Not illegally, not in a way that would get us thrown out of court. We were in a jurisdiction where it was permitted with consent from one party, and I was a party. He didn't know that. He kept talking. He told me calmly that my fund was a vanity project. He told me my partner was a risk. He told me that if I didn't settle down, the trust would tighten, like a collar. I nodded, soft-eyed. "I don't want to cause problems," I said. His shoulders eased slightly. "That's good," he said. I looked at him with an expression that I'm sure looked like surrender. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He smiled, almost warmly. "Come back inside," he said. "Let the family handle your future." When I left the club, my hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I felt strangely calm, like I'd just watched someone sign their name at the bottom of their own confession. Elise listened to the recording the next day. She replayed one section twice. "This is it," she said. "What part?" I asked. She pointed to the line where he said, clear as day, that the trust would tighten if I didn't comply. "He admitted coercive intent," she said. "He framed it as protection, but it's control. That's abuse of protector power." I exhaled slowly. "So we can challenge him," I said. Elise nodded. "And we can do more than challenge," she said. "We can force disclosure." Disclosure in legal language is a beautiful thing. It means show your work. And people who build their power on hidden structures hate being forced to show their work. We filed quietly, not as a scandal, not as a dramatic lawsuit splashed across headlines, a confidential claim, breach of fiduciary duty, abuse of protector role, interference, coercion. We requested injunctions to stop further restrictions while the matter was reviewed. We requested disclosure of all protector communications, all internal notes, all compliance flags, all trustee instructions. When the documents began to arrive, it was like watching a dam crack. Emails, memos, internal discussions, language that made my skin crawl because it was so reasonable. She is emotionally volatile. She is susceptible to influence. She lacks discipline. She needs structure. Every sentence written about me as if I were a malfunctioning instrument, not a person. And then we found the real poison. a memo from my uncle to Nadia instructing her to manage narratives around my business activities, a section titled Containment Strategy. Containment. The word was almost clinical. It outlined steps, delay deals, discourage partners, flag compliance concerns, create concerned records, ensure trustees have justification, ensure the family appears protective. It wasn't about me being safe. It was about me being contained until I stopped resisting. Elise looked at me after we read it. "They wrote their intent down," she said quietly. "They got sloppy." I felt something in my chest that wasn't relief. It was grief, because there it was, proof that my family had been quietly designing my life like a project plan, and Nadia had been executing it with calm precision. We sent the containment memo to the court as supporting evidence. Then we did something else. We sent it to the charity regulators, because while my uncle could spin trust control as family concern, he could not spin charity fraud as protection. Within 2 weeks, the world around my uncle began to change. Not publicly at first, quietly. A board meeting postponed, a senior colleague stepping away from him, a bank requesting clarification, the kind of cracks that only the wealthy notice because they know what those cracks mean. Then my father called me, voice tight. "What have you done?" he asked. I kept my voice soft. "I'm correcting something," I said. He sounded angry now, but the anger had fear under it. "You're blowing this up," he said. I paused. "No," I said gently. He did. My father's silence was long. Then he said something I didn't expect. "You don't understand," he whispered. That whisper wasn't about me. It was about him. And suddenly I saw it. My father wasn't the puppet master. He was part of the system. He'd grown up under my uncle's shadow, under my grandfather's plans, under a structure that demanded compliance. He'd learned to call control stability. He'd learned to call coercion protection. And he'd handed that lesson to me like an inheritance. "I understand more than you think," I said. He exhaled. "You're going to destroy the family," he said. I let the words hang. Then I said the calmest thing I could. "If the family can be destroyed by truth," I replied, "then it deserves to be." After that, my mother arrived at my apartment unannounced. She looked perfect, as always, hair flawless, eyes bright, but her mouth was tense. She walked in, sat, and stared at me like she was trying to find the child she used to manage. "This isn't how we handle things," she said. I poured her tea like this was a normal visit. "How do we handle things?" I asked. "We handle them privately," she said. "We don't involve outsiders." I smiled faintly. "Elise isn't an outsider," I said. "She's a professional." My mother's eyes sharpened. "She's dangerous," she said. I tilted my head. "Because she writes things down?" I asked. My mother's expression flickered, and for the first time I saw real emotion, something like panic. "You don't know what he's capable of," she said. I kept my voice calm. "I'm starting to," I said. She swallowed. "He won't forgive you," she whispered. That sentence was supposed to scare me. Instead, it clarified everything. Forgiveness implied he believed I'd wronged him, as if exposing fraud and coercion was betrayal, as if control was his right. I looked at my mother and said softly, "Did you know?" She held my gaze. Then in the smallest nod, she answered, "Yes." The betrayal wasn't just my uncle. It wasn't just Nadia. It was everyone who knew and chose the comfort of the system over my freedom. After that, things escalated fast. Nadia stopped responding to me. She didn't need to anymore. The trustees began to stall. Administrative delays. Process reviews. Classic. Elise pushed back harder, filed motions, requested sanctions, and then, one morning, I received a message from an unknown number, a single photo. It was a screenshot of my private email account login page with a caption, "We see everything." My hands stayed steady. My stomach didn't. Elise stared at the message when I showed her. "This is intimidation," she said. And it's stupid. Stupid? I asked. It means they're scared, she said. People in control don't send messages like this unless they feel control slipping. I breathed out slowly. But they can hack me, I said. Elise shook her head. They can try, she said. Now we document it. We reported it. We added it to filings. We notified the court that intimidation attempts were occurring. And then Elise did something that felt almost cruel in its elegance. She sent a formal letter, polite, unemotional, to my uncle's legal counsel. It said, "Any further interference or intimidation will be presented as evidence of ongoing abuse and coercion. And given the charity findings, we will be expanding our disclosures." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. That night, my uncle called again. This time, his voice wasn't smooth. It was tight. "You're making a mistake," he said. I sat on my couch, phone to my ear, and looked at the city lights outside my window. I kept my voice calm. "No," I said. "I'm making a choice." "You think you're winning," he said. "I'm not trying to win," I replied. "I'm trying to be free." He laughed, but it was sharp. "You're nothing without the family," he said. That sentence, "you're nothing," was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, because in his mind my value had always been conditional. A vessel, a name, a future, not a person. I let the silence stretch again. Then I said softly, "You should have taught me better," I said. He paused. "What?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "You should have taught me to be afraid of you," I said. "Instead, you taught me how you work." His breath caught, and then, for the first time, he sounded truly angry. "You don't know what you've started," he hissed. I kept my voice even. "I do," I said, "and you can't stop it." I ended the call. A week later, the first real public crack appeared. Not a headline, not a scandal, a resignation. My uncle stepped down from the charity board for personal reasons. In our world, that was the equivalent of blood on the carpet. It meant the regulators had found enough to make him step away before they pushed. The next domino fell quietly, too. A bank that had handled family accounts for decades requested review meetings. Then a third, a longtime advisor, suddenly stopped returning my uncle's calls. The machine was turning. But here's the part most people don't understand. Wealthy families don't collapse like a house. They collapse like ice. First it looks fine. Then suddenly, there's a sound you can't take back, and everything shifts. The court scheduled a closed hearing. The trustees submitted statements. My uncle's counsel tried to argue it was family misunderstanding. Elise stood and spoke like a blade. "This is not misunderstanding," she said. "This is containment. This is coercion. And here is the document where they named it." The judge listened, and then the judge said something simple that changed everything. "Order disclosure in full. In full. No more selective sharing. No more tidy summaries. Full disclosure meant every email, every note, every internal memo, every instruction. Everything they'd used to control me became evidence, and evidence doesn't care how important your last name is." Over the following month, we learned the true scale. My uncle hadn't just been containing me. He'd been positioning himself. He'd been quietly shifting trust structures, making contingency plans, ensuring his people were in place. He'd been grooming my father to comply, nudging my mother to soothe, using Nadia to manage. And the scariest part? It had been working, until it wasn't. The final turn didn't come from Elise, or the court, or even the regulators. It came from inside the family. My father asked to meet me alone, not in public, not in his office, in my apartment. He arrived without his usual armor. No polished calm, no steady posture. He looked tired, old. He sat, stared at his hands, and said, "I didn't know it was this bad." I watched him quietly. He continued, voice low. "He has documents," he said, "about me, about things I signed, about things I didn't question." I felt a cold understanding. "He has leverage on you," I said. My father nodded, almost imperceptibly. "He always has," he whispered. Then he looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear, not of the world, of his brother. "He told me," my father said, "if I don't stop you, he'll burn me too." I nodded slowly. "So stop me," I said. My father flinched as if the words hurt. "I can't," he said. There was a pause, heavy and strange. Then he said something that made my chest tighten. "I don't want to," he said. That was his quiet rebellion, not dramatic, not heroic, a simple refusal. And that refusal mattered, because my father had access. He had credibility. He had authority in the family's eyes, and now he was cracking. He slid a folder across my table. "I copied this from his files," he said, before he noticed. I opened it. Inside was a list: names, dates, transfers. A private ledger of payments routed through the charity vehicles. Amounts larger than anything we'd found. My uncle hadn't just been skimming. He'd been siphoning. For years. I stared at the page, feeling an odd, distant calm. "This will destroy him," I said quietly. My father swallowed. "He deserves it," he said. That was the moment everything inverted. The man who'd preached protection was now handing me the knife that would end the protector. Elise submitted the ledger to regulators. The regulators moved quickly after that, not because they suddenly cared, because it was too obvious to ignore. My uncle was formally investigated. His accounts were reviewed. His boards distanced themselves. And then the final blow came quietly, like everything else in our world. He was removed as trust protector, not by some grand family vote, by legal force, a court order based on abuse and conflict of interest. The day it happened, Nadia vanished. No goodbye, no apology. She stopped answering. Her number disconnected. The staff at the family office suddenly acted like she'd never existed. That's what people do when they're trying to survive a collapsing structure. They rewrite reality. My uncle tried one last move. He sent me a letter, not an email, a physical letter, heavy paper, elegant signature. It said, in essence, that I was tearing apart what was built for me. It said I would regret it. It said I was naive. It said I was ungrateful. It said he forgave me. I read it once. Then I placed it in the file with the containment memo and the ledger where it belonged, as evidence of how he saw himself, not as a thief, not as an abuser, as a guardian, the kind of guardian who tightens the collar and calls it love. The payoff didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like silence. The trust restrictions were lifted under court supervision. The compliance flags were removed with formal letters from institutions that suddenly wanted to look clean. My fund, what was left of it, began to breathe again. My partner, who had watched this whole thing with a mix of anger and disbelief, said one night, "So what now?" I looked around my apartment, at the simple life I'd built outside the family estate, and I realized something unsettling. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't celebrating. I was recalibrated. Because the battle hadn't just been legal, it had been psychological. They'd tried to teach me that my freedom was dangerous. Now I understood the opposite. My freedom was the only thing that had ever been mine. I visited the family estate once after everything settled, not for a dinner, not for reconciliation, just to walk. The halls looked the same. The art hung in the same places. The staff moved quietly like ghosts. My mother greeted me like we were returning from a holiday. My father looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. My uncle wasn't there. He was away. That was the polite word they used now, as if his absence was temporary and not a permanent removal from power. I walked through the library and stopped by the long table where Nadia had first interviewed me, asking questions that made me feel understood. I realized then she'd been profiling me, learning what I feared, learning what I wanted, not to help me, to contain me efficiently. I traced a finger along the table edge, feeling the smooth wood, and I felt a strange tenderness for the person I used to be, the one who thought belonging meant safety. Before I left, my mother said softly, "You've changed." I looked at her. "I grew up," I said. She blinked, a tight smile on her lips. "You'll come back," she said like it was inevitable. "You always do." I smiled faintly. "No," I said. "You just assumed I would." I walked out, and as I stepped into the open air, I understood the true recontextualization, the thing that made everything before feel darker. My family hadn't betrayed me because they hated me. They betrayed me because they thought I belonged to them. They thought my choices were theirs to approve. They thought my life was a structure they had the right to maintain. And the most dangerous part was that they believed it was love. That's why they never looked like villains. They looked like caretakers. They sounded like reason. They spoke in calm, concerned tones. They smiled while tightening the leash. The revenge wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public humiliation or screaming matches. It was something far more devastating in our world. I took away what they valued most: control. I left them with their estates, their art, their clubs, their rituals. But I removed the assumption that my life was theirs to manage. And once that assumption dies, the whole machine becomes less certain, less stable, less inevitable. That's the part they never understood. They thought I was dangerous because I was naive. They were wrong. I became dangerous because I learned. And now, every time someone in that family sits in a room and makes a decision for the best, there's a new hesitation in the air, a tiny, quiet question they didn't have before. What if she finds out? What if she's watching? Because I am. Not with anger, not with obsession, with calm, with patience, with the kind of attention they taught me. And that's the lingering aftertaste that never really leaves. The people who raised you can teach you exactly how to undo them. They just never believe you will.